Let's watch this short, The Historical Proof for the Divinity of Jesus Christ with Lee Strobel, aka the guy who wrote The Case for Confirmation Bias, where he plays a hard-hitting detective who only interviewed the suspect's mom, his pastor, and the suspect's fan club, and called it irrefutable evidence. All right, Lee, what you got for us today?
I say unequivocally that the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. When I was a student at Yale Law School, one of my heroes was a man who became known as the greatest defense attorney in the world. He was literally in the Guinness Book of World Records. He won more murder trials in a row as a defense attorney than anybody in history. What was it? Over 240 murder trials in a row he won before the jury or on appeal. Greatest defense attorney. So I admired him because he was brilliant and he knew what evidence is. He was knighted twice by Queen Elizabeth, appointed to the Supreme Court of his country. His name was Sir Lionel Luckhoo. And like me at the time, he was a skeptic about the resurrection. This was before I was a Christian. And so I admired him. One day, somebody came up to him and says, Sir Lionel, you're the greatest lawyer in the world. Have you ever taken your monumental legal skill and applied it to the historical record for the resurrection and come to an informed verdict about whether Jesus rose from the dead? And he said, no, I haven't, but I will. So Sir Lionel Luckhoo, this incredible legal mind, spent years investigating the resurrection. And I'll recite to you one sentence he wrote that summarized his conclusion. He said, I say unequivocally that the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. This from the greatest defense attorney who ever lived.
That's so wrong and so dumb I don't even know where to begin. Like, imagine saying the Earth is flat with the confidence of someone who's never opened Google Earth. Over 240 murder trials in a row? Okay, that's definitely impressive, but maybe not the kind of thing you put on your moral resume.
Waller, I can assure you their cause of action is totally baseless.
I haven't even told you what it is yet.
No room for doubt? Really? People doubt everything. Christians themselves doubt their own interpretations of Christianity. Whole denominations exist because believers can't agree on baptism, communion, or even whether the book of Revelation is literal or symbolic. But sure, when it comes to the resurrection, suddenly we've reached case closed, folks. No debate allowed. The actual scholarly consensus is way more modest. Jesus probably existed, he was crucified, and then something happened afterward that his followers thought were appearances. What was that something? That's the actual debate. Yeah, no room for doubt about a 2,000-year-old event that was written down 40 to 60 years later by people who didn't know Jesus, didn't live in Judea, didn't speak his language, basing it all on oral traditions, stories that have been in circulation for many years. And it involves a dead guy coming back to life, something we have exactly 0 examples of today. Yep, definitely no room for doubt there. If there's really no room for doubt, explain why Bart Ehrman, one of the most respected New Testament scholars alive, is not a Christian. Christians love to say, the disciples wouldn't want to be tortured or thrown into lions. Okay, but by that same logic, Bart wouldn't risk his eternal soul in hell if he knew Christianity was obviously true. If there's truly no room for doubt, then Bart is either the most irrational man alive, or maybe, just maybe, there actually is room for doubt. The single most well-established piece of evidence in the entire resurrection case is that Jesus was crucified. Nothing else comes close. And even that is still doubted by a small group of scholars. That's why you'll sometimes see scholars phrase it as almost certain, virtually certain, or historically likely. It's historian speak for, we're as sure as we can reasonably be, but technically, there's still a tiny room for doubt. And you know, Jesus not existing at all is still more probable than a resurrection. One is unlikely, the other is flat-out magic. Being a brilliant lawyer doesn't automatically make you a historian. Why should a lawyer's opinion carry more weight than actual historians, textual critics, and scholars of antiquity who dedicate their careers to this stuff, and still aren't convinced? That's like saying Gordon Ramsay is qualified to perform heart surgery because he's good with knives. Totally different fields, my friend. So what we really have here is a journalist, not a historian, quoting a lawyer, not a historian, to tell us there's no room for doubt, and we're supposed to nod along like that settles the case? At that point, you're not presenting evidence, you're doing stand-up comedy. Real historical evidence always leaves room for doubt, especially when it involves miracles. If someone tells you there's absolutely no room for doubt about a first-century resurrection claim, they've stopped investigating and started preaching. No room for doubt?
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Legal cases are often resolved with physical evidence or witness testimony that can be cross-examined in a courtroom. But, even with that, I guarantee you Lionel spent his whole career ripping witness testimonies to shreds.
You have a job to do, and so do I. Mine is to cross-examine people like you and crush them. This man here would fire me if I didn't.
So imagine this defense in one of his trials. My client is innocent. The crime was committed by his dead sister, who rose from the grave decades after the event, confirmed by a handful of articles from a newspaper owned and operated by my client's closest friends. No, you can't cross-examine the witnesses. That's basically the resurrection argument in a courtroom format. If Lionel really applied his monumental legal skill, he should have laughed this thing out of court. So when he says that the evidence is overwhelming and absolutely no room for doubt, it seems more like a conclusion based on personal belief. His conversion is just an emotional or spiritual shift, not a purely intellectual conclusion. Absolutely no room for doubt? Is that the new trend now? So a resurrection is more plausible than mass hallucination? More plausible than legendary exaggeration? More plausible than the disciples or whatever just stealing the body and lying? No. Clearly, the only possible answer is magic with no room for doubt. Even if it's 1 in a million, it means highly unlikely, but absolutely no room for doubt?
Of the ridiculous, absurd, preposterous, outlandish, far-fetched, incredulous, outrageous!
That's like saying 1 in a million means you're gonna win the lottery every time. Thanks, Lee, for the irrefutable evidence. Bye. See you next time.